Imagine standing in the cold marble halls of a grand Macedonian palace. You're about to witness one of the darkest weddings in ancient history. A woman adjusts the golden crown on her head, her hands tremble. Not from fear, but from deep anger. She's forced to hide like swallowing poison. Around her, nobles cheer, thinking this is her great moment. But they don't know the truth. This woman is Arsinoe II, one of the most powerful women of the ancient world. She's marrying her half-brother, Ptolemy Coronos. People call him Thunderbolt, because he moves fast and kills faster. He stands beside her, his arm tight around her waist. His smile is cold. The crown he placed on her head feels like chains. He promised to protect her sons and make them heirs. But she knows what he really wants. Power and her children stand in his way. His sweet words can't hide the blood on his hands. Priests chant to the gods, calling on Zeus and Hera, who were siblings too, to bless this marriage. The irony stings. Everyone acts like this is a holy union, but they ignore the pain in Arsinoe's eyes. This isn't her first time being used. At 15, her father married her off to Lysimachus, an old warrior king. Now at 40, she's once again a piece in someone else's game. As she sips the ceremonial wine, it tastes like ashes. She's not celebrating, she's planning. She's learned that in the brutal world of royal politics, beauty isn't enough. You need brains, patience, and the strength to break rules, even the ones made by gods. Ptolemy Coronos lifts his cup to toast their happy union. In the crowd, her oldest son, also named Ptolemy, watches from a distance. He didn't come to the palace, sensing danger. That choice might save him. But for Arsinoe, her future hangs by a thread. She is daughter of the great Ptolemy Soter, who helped carry Alexander the Great's body, has become what enemies always claimed royal women were: pawns. But they forget pawns can reach the other side of the board and become queens. The wedding ends with fake smiles and empty promises. That night, while Macedonia celebrates, Arsinoe will lie beside a man who sees her only as a means to power and sees her sons as problems to erase. But he doesn't know who he's married. He doesn't realize she's already survived worse, and he has no idea she's already setting the trap that could either save her or destroy them both. Before we go deeper into this tale of survival, if you love uncovering the hidden stories of royal power and pain, hit like and subscribe. Arsinoe II's life didn't begin with love, it began with cold strategy. She was born around 316 BCE in Alexandria, a city bursting with ambition. Her father, Ptolemy I, had been one of Alexander the Great's closest generals. After Alexander's death, he carved out his own kingdom. Little Arsinoe learned quickly that her beauty wasn't hers, it was a tool for alliances. Her stepmother, Bernice, had once been a servant but rose to be queen using charm and intelligence. She told Arsinoe tales of goddesses, but the real lesson was clear. Daughters were political pawns in the hands of powerful men. Alexandria was alive with learning, trade, and culture. Scholars came to the library, ships crowded the harbor with exotic goods. But beneath the wealth, tension simmered. Greek rulers were pretending to be Egyptian gods. To keep power, they had to constantly prove themselves. Arsinoe grew up speaking Greek in the palace and learning Egyptian from the servants. She saw temple rituals and learned Egypt's oldest traditions. In Egypt, kings weren't just rulers, they were gods. Gods, according to legend, could marry their siblings. To Egyptians, it was sacred. But to Greeks, it was disturbing. At just 15, Arsinoe's father arranged her marriage. It was around 300 BC. The generals who divided Alexander's empire were still fighting. To protect his kingdom, Ptolemy I married her to Lysimachus, king of Thrace, 55-year-old war veteran. He had scars from battles and even a lion fight. To a teenage girl, he must have seemed like a legend and a threat all at once. Their wedding took place in Sardis, a city once ruled by Persian kings. The hall glittered with wealth. Arsinoe wore a purple robe, her dark hair crowned in gold. She looked beautiful and strong, but inside she was scared. Lysimachus slid a ring onto her finger and whispered wedding vows, but his mind was on war. This wasn't love. This was a deal. She tasted it in the wedding wine, bitter, unkind. The celebration lasted 3 days. Poets called her the new Helen of Troy. Dancers twirled, musicians played. But under the music was a harsh truth. She was no longer a girl, she was queen of Thrace. Caught in the middle of dangerous games, her new kingdom was surrounded by threats. Northern tribes, rival kings, and the massive Seleucid Empire were always ready to strike. In this risky world, Arsinoe had to learn fast. Looks weren't enough. She had to understand power, when to act, when to wait, when to speak, when to be silent. She watched everyone at court, reading every glance and whisper, learning who could be trusted and who could betray. A year after marrying, Arsinoe became pregnant. In 299 BCE, she gave birth to a baby boy named Ptolemy. His birth changed her life. She was now not just a wife, but a mother. Not just a queen, but someone who could start a royal dynasty. Soon, she had two more sons. Lysimachus in 297 BCE and Philip in 294 BCE. With each birth, her position at court grew stronger. Her children weren't just family, they were political tools in the struggle over who would one day rule. But there was a problem. Her husband, Lysimachus, already had a son named Agatocles from his first marriage. As Arsinoe's sons grew, the question of who would inherit the kingdom became more serious. Would the crown go to Agatocles, born to a non-royal mother, or to Arsinoe's sons, born from an Egyptian princess? At first, people only whispered. Servants gossiped, and nobles began choosing sides. Some supported Agatocles, others backed Arsinoe's children. Arsinoe knew she was in a dangerous position. She wasn't from this land. She was a foreign queen, and many people didn't trust her. Her sons were seen as a threat to the old way of doing things. Same people who once praised her now watched her every move with suspicion. Even her words and gestures were questioned. The pressure was intense. She was a young mother, far from home, surrounded by people pretending to be her allies, but secretly plotting against her. Her father had hoped this marriage would protect Egypt's future. If she failed, it could damage her whole family's empire. But Arsinoe adapted. She made allies among the royal women, used her wealth to win support, and backed poets and thinkers who admired her. She joined local religious ceremonies to show respect, but still kept her Egyptian identity. Slowly, she built her own circle of influence, separate from her husband's. Then came the turning point. In 283 BCE, her oldest son Ptolemy turned 16. In Greek tradition, that meant he was old enough to be named as heir. King Lysimachus was now 73. He had ruled for nearly 4 decades, and age had slowed him down. But he still had a sharp mind and faced a tough choice. Support Agatocles and risk upsetting Egypt. Or support Arsinoe's sons and risk angering powerful supporters of Agatocles. Historians still debate what happened next. Some say Arsinoe charmed her husband into turning against his son. Others believe she simply showed him that Agatocles was too dangerous. Whatever the truth, in 283 BCE, Agatocles was arrested for treason. The evidence was weak, just letters, strange meetings, and witnesses who may have been paid or pressured. But in Greek politics, even suspicion could be deadly. Days later, Agatocles was executed on his father's orders. The court was stunned. Agatocles had been popular and had fought beside his father in many battles. His death made it clear Arsinoe's sons were now the chosen heirs. But this victory came with a heavy cost. The kingdom split. Many nobles saw Arsinoe as dangerous, especially older ones loyal to Agatocles. Even compared her to the mythical Medea, a woman who betrayed her family for power. Outside enemies saw their chance. Seleucus I, one of Alexander the Great's last surviving generals, prepared to invade. Tribes attacked from the north. Pirates raided the coast. The kingdom was crumbling from within and couldn't defend itself. In 281 BCE, things fell apart. Seleucus invaded western Anatolia, claiming it was revenge for Agatocles. Lysimachus, despite being old, went to fight. At the Battle of Corupedium, the two elderly kings clashed for the last time. Lysimachus lost badly. His weakened army couldn't hold up. He was killed in battle, pierced by many spears. With his death, his kingdom collapsed. Arsinoe, just 35, and now a widow, was in serious danger. She had 3 sons to protect, no army, and enemies closing in. Ambitious generals were grabbing land, and angry nobles were looking for revenge. Seleucus was approaching fast. Arsinoe had no safe place left, but she didn't give up. She had spent 20 years surviving court politics with courage and cleverness. When she heard her husband had died, she immediately began planning her escape. She called her loyal followers, gathered her treasures, and prepared to flee. The same queen who once entered the city in a grand wedding now had to run for her life. It was cruel irony. She had played the power game like a master. She had protected her children by removing her stepson. She had endured years of suspicion and gossip. And now, when she needed power most, all she could do was run. The journey to safety was terrifying. Imagine a royal group traveling at night, torches flickering in the dark, and the soft sound of horses' hooves on sand. Arsinoe rode with her 3 sons, Ptolemy, 17, Lysimachus, 15, and Philip, 12. They were no longer princes, just refugees. Their royal clothes were replaced with rough travel gear. Behind them, their kingdom had fallen. Seleucus had taken over the capital, and his soldiers were hunting anyone connected to the old rulers. People who once supported Arsinoe were now being killed or sold as slaves. Cities that welcomed her before now opened their gates to her enemies. But Seleucus didn't get to enjoy his victory for long. While Arsinoe escaped west, another event was unfolding. Her half-brother, Ptolemy Coronos, son of her father's first wife, had been living in exile at Seleucus' court. Seleucus promised to help him reclaim the throne of Macedonia. But Coronos was impatient, ruthless, and hungry for power. Just as Seleucus prepared to conquer more land, Coronos struck. He killed Seleucus, his own ally, and took command of the army in the Macedonian crown. The last living friend of Alexander the Great had been murdered by someone young enough to be his grandson. Arsinoe got the shocking news while hiding in a port town near the Aegean Sea. Her half-brother, who had once been denied the throne in Egypt, was now king of Macedonia. Then came another shock. He wanted to marry her. His offer arrived through a messenger, speaking sweet words about peace and family. Coronos said he would make her sons his heirs, and promised to return the kingdom their father Lysimachus had lost. He talked about love, destiny, and how their royal family was meant to rule. Arsinoe listened with a blank face. She had heard such promises before, from her husband, from advisors, and from other kings. She knew royal words were often lies. Still, she had few options. Her sons needed safety, and she needed power to protect them. Saying yes to Coronos was the hardest decision of her life. She was now 40, no longer a young bride, and had seen how cruel, powerful men could be. Marrying her half-brother was dangerous, and likely a trap. But if she refused, she'd spend her life running and hiding, and her sons would grow up without power or protection. Saying yes meant risking everything on the small hope that family might mean more than politics. Before leaving, Arsinoe made a painful choice. She sent her eldest son, Ptolemy, away to stay with a trusted ally. If something happened, at least one son might survive to carry on their family's legacy. It was a decision made not just by a queen, but by a mother with deep love and hard-earned wisdom. The wedding took place in Pella, the ancient capital of Macedonia, where Alexander the Great once lived. It was grand. Coronos wanted to show his power. But beneath the colors, music, and dancing, it was all politics. Arsinoe stood beside her half-brother as priests performed the sacred rituals. They shared the same father, Ptolemy I, but had different mothers. In Egypt, royal family marriages were considered holy. But to the Greeks, it felt strange, more like a desperate move than a divine one. The wedding celebrations lasted 3 days, but the happiness ended that same night. Coronos had never intended to build a strong family. He wanted to destroy any threat to his rule. That night, his soldiers broke into the room where Arsinoe's younger sons were sleeping. Lysimachus and Philip, just 15 and 12, were dragged from their beds and murdered in front of their mother. Their blood soaked the marble floors of the palace where Alexander the Great once played. Arsinoe's screams echoed through the halls, a sound of pure grief that would be remembered for generations. But there was no time to mourn. As her sons' bodies were taken away, Arsinoe was already thinking of escape. She had survived dangerous royal courts for 20 years and wasn't ready to give up. Like her father, Ptolemy I, she planned to outsmart her enemies. Surrounded by spies and guards, she began plotting her way out. Her escape was like something from an adventure story. With help from loyal servants and a hidden network inside the palace, Arsinoe fled in the middle of the night. She wore a disguise, plain wool clothes, and a simple headscarf instead of her crown. She even left a decoy behind, a servant who looked just enough like her to fool the guards. The journey was full of danger. Arsinoe's men were everywhere, searching for her. But brave people helped her along the way. Some were loyal, others were paid, but all knew they were part of a moment history would remember. Her destination was Samothrace, a sacred island known for its ancient temples and protection for those in danger. Its traditions were older than any Greek or Macedonian law. Even Kharanos wouldn't dare violate such a holy place. As Arsinoe's ship approached its rocky shore, she must have felt the full weight of her sorrow. She had been queen 3 times, ruled 2 kingdoms, and had 3 sons. Now she was a fugitive, depending on the mercy of priests and ancient customs. 2 of her sons had been murdered by her own half-brother. Her last remaining son was far away in exile, his fate uncertain. Arsinoe wasn't the type to give up when life fell apart. Even though she was devastated by the loss of her children, she quickly began planning her next move. She had one last hope, a final chance to rebuild her life and protect her future. Her youngest brother, Ptolemy II, was now king of Egypt. If she could make it to Alexandria and persuade him to help, she might still have a future. The journey from Samothrace to Alexandria was full of danger. Kharanos' warships blocked the north, while pirates swarmed the southern seas. But Arsinoe had learned to survive by using her wit. She traveled in secrets, sometimes pretending to be a merchant's wife, other times acting like a religious pilgrim. Her once famous beauty was now hidden beneath plain clothes and makeup to keep her safe. When she finally reached Alexandria, the city where she was born, her heart must have been full of emotion. This was her home, but also the place from where her exile had started 40 years earlier. The palace she once played in as a child now belonged to a brother she barely knew. Ptolemy II Philadelphus was now 36. He was clever, good at running the kingdom, and had taken over from his powerful father. But unlike his father, he wasn't a bold warrior. Egypt was wealthy under his rule, its trade strong, and its temples well maintained. But he ruled cautiously, avoiding risk. When Arsinoe met her brother, it was awkward. They hadn't seen each other in decades, and trust was not easy between them. Arsinoe was no longer the young girl who had once left the city in a royal wedding carriage. Now she was a hardened woman, scarred by betrayal and desperate for a fresh start. To Ptolemy, she was both a potential ally and a possible threat. Their conversations were delicate. Arsinoe needed protection, but she also wanted respect. She had been a queen and a political force. She couldn't just fade into the background. The solution they found was unexpected but smart. Ptolemy was already married to a woman named Arsinoe, who had given him children, but she wasn't politically skilled. If he divorced her and married his sister instead, he wouldn't just gain a new queen, he'd gain a powerful partner who knew politics inside out. In Egypt, it wasn't strange for kings to marry their sisters. Pharaohs had done it for thousands of years, following the example of the gods. Isis and Osiris, the brother and sister who ruled the land of the dead, were seen as divine partners. Their union was holy, not wrong. But the Ptolemies were Greek, and to the Greek world, sibling marriage was shocking. It went against nature, disgusted many people, and stirred up public debate. No full siblings in the Ptolemaic dynasty had ever married before. Some had married cousins or half-sisters, but never a full sister. So this was a huge decision. Ptolemy knew it would affect how future generations saw his family. But he also saw the benefits. Marrying Arsinoe would make him seem more like a real Egyptian pharaoh, not just a Greek ruler in Egypt. When the news spread, it shook the entire Greek world. Writers, thinkers, and rulers debated what it meant. Some believed it showed that the Ptolemies had fallen too far under Egyptian influence. Others saw it as a smart power move, using sacred tradition to secure their rule in a way no other Greek king could. The wedding itself was grand and meant to show this was no normal marriage, it was divine. The ceremony was held at the great temple of Ptah in Memphis, Egypt's ancient capital. Egyptian traditions were followed, not Greek ones. The ceremony highlighted the sacred bond between brother and sister, now presented as god and goddess. Arsinoe, now 41, stood beside her 26-year-old brother as the high priest of Ptah performed the rites. She wore the double crown of Egypt, symbolizing rule over both Upper and Lower Egypt. Ptolemy wore the symbols of a pharaoh, the crook and the flail, showing he was protector and king. The songs sung that day were older than the pyramids themselves. They spoke of holy union, of heaven meeting earth, and of chaos being turned into order. That day, the couple was declared not just royal but divine. The Greek citizens of Alexandria were stunned. Some were disturbed, but they were also in awe. They had never seen anything like it. Egyptian religion, with its full rituals and sacred symbolism, was something totally new to them. The Ptolemies had always tried to walk a line between being Greek and being Egyptian. But now, they had clearly chosen to be pharaohs in the Egyptian sense. The marriage transformed both Arsinoe and Ptolemy. He became known as Theoi Philadelphus, sibling-loving. The name honored the marriage and made a powerful public statement. Arsinoe took the same title, Arsinoe Philadelphus. She was now queen, sister, wife, and co-ruler. Together, they were called the Theoi Philadelphoi, the Sibling-Loving Gods. Ruling Egypt, just like Isis and Osiris once ruled the world of the dead, this wasn't just about wearing a crown. Arsinoe brought years of hard-earned experience in surviving the dangerous world of ancient politics. She had lived through the rule of powerful men like Lysimachus and Coronos. She had watched kingdoms rise and fall, and had learned how to survive in a world where showing weakness could get you killed. Now, for the first time, she had real power, and she wasn't afraid to use it. As Queen Arsinoe gave her full energy to her royal duties, people were surprised by how hard she worked. She traveled with Ptolemy across the kingdom, helping solve problems and ease tensions among Egypt's many different groups. She also supported artists and scholars, keeping Alexandria a famous center of learning and culture. But her biggest role was in foreign politics. The world was becoming more dangerous. Rome was growing stronger in the west, and in the east, the Parthians were threatening the Seleucid Empire. The Ptolemies had to act carefully. Arsinoe understood how religious symbols could strengthen their image. She and Ptolemy began appearing on coins and statues as gods, shown beside Egypt's ancient deities. These images showed them blessing the land and receiving offerings, presenting them as divine protectors who kept the world in balance, and the people believed it. Both Greeks and Egyptians began to see them not just as foreign rulers, but as true pharaohs, part of Egypt's sacred tradition. Their divine marriage gave the Ptolemaic dynasty something rare, a right to rule that was accepted both politically and spiritually by two very different cultures. But this success came with great pain. Arsinoe had lost everything to get here. Her first marriage, her children, her youth. She had spent years in exile, been betrayed, and watched her sons murdered. She had even fled across the sea for her life. Now, at the end of it all, she had reached the top. She was seen as a living goddess. She and Ptolemy II had no children together, but that didn't matter. He already had heirs from a previous marriage, and Arsinoe was too old to have more. What mattered now wasn't children, it was the powerful image. They had created blending religion and politics to become something greater than human. Standing in the palace at Alexandria, wearing the Egyptian crown, Arsinoe must have thought back on her long and painful journey. She had once been used by her father to gain power, married off to an older king, nearly killed by her half-brother. But she had taken control of her life. She used every strength she had, her beauty, her cleverness, her courage, to survive and rise. In the end, she succeeded. Her example lived on. Later rulers in her family followed her path, even marrying their siblings to protect their divine image. The most famous of them, Cleopatra VII, married two of her brothers and used the same godlike image to challenge Rome. But that's another story. Right now, we see Arsinoe at the height of her power, and we should remember what it took for her to get there. She had been forced into marrying family twice. She had been used like a pawn from childhood. But somehow, she turned all that pain into strength. The same woman who once sobbed as her children were taken from her now stood like a goddess in Egypt, untouchable. Her name would be remembered not just in history books, but in the hearts and beliefs of the people she ruled. She paid a heavy price for power, But in return, she earned something few ever do: the chance to live forever in memory. As the sun set over the Nile and shadows grew long across the palace gardens, Arsinoe likely felt a deep and powerful sense of peace. She had lived through disasters that should have destroyed her, but she came out stronger. She had faced impossible odds and won. The young girl, once forced into marriage at 15, had transformed into a powerful figure, honored almost like a goddess. She wasn't just a queen anymore. She had changed what it meant to be one in her family. Her bloodline might not survive through her own children, but her legacy would live on through the traditions she created. One of those was the practice of royal siblings marrying each other. At first, it seemed strange and disturbing, but over time, it became the very heart of the Ptolemaic dynasty. And generations of queens would remember her as the one who started it all. The woman who proved that even in the darkest times, you could survive. But her victory came with a terrible cost, a cost no one could ever forget. Every royal marriage after hers would carry a hint of the pain she endured. Every sacred ritual would echo the price she paid. In saving the dynasty, she lost herself. She stopped being seen as a person and became a symbol. She was worshipped like a goddess, not loved like a woman. And the cruelest truth of all, to protect her children, she had to give up the very part of her that made her human. She wanted to remain a mother, but she became a legend instead. The woman who only wanted to save her family accidentally created a tradition that would go on to destroy countless others. As night fell over Alexandria, the city moved to a rhythm that would continue for the next 300 years. In the palace, the royal couple performed sacred rituals, believing their bond kept the universe balanced. In temples, priests prayed for the well-being of the divine siblings, now called Theoi Philadelphoi. In the streets, farmers, scholars, traders, and fishermen lived their lives under rulers who had once been ordinary people, but were now treated like gods. And somewhere in the silence of memory, spirits of two murdered boys seemed to play in the same gardens where they once laughed. Their laughter, faint and ghostly, echoed through the centuries, a haunting reminder of what power always demands in return. The tradition Arsinoe began would outlive her, but it could never escape the blood that helped it grow. Her story wasn't over yet. Ptolemaic dynasty would continue for another 250 years, ruled by both brilliant minds and ruthless hearts. But they would all look back to her, to this moment, to this transformation, when a woman who had once been powerless became something divine. In the years that followed her sacred marriage, the connection between power and sacrifice became clearer than ever. Now in her 40s, Arsinoe had dedicated herself fully to her new role as Pharaoh Queen. She understood this could be her final chance to shape history. From her past, she had learned that survival wasn't just about staying alive. It was about becoming so valuable that no one could afford to lose you. That lesson would soon be tested. In 274 BCE, the First Syrian War began. The Seleucid Empire was still shaky after the assassination of its founder, Seleucus. His son, Antiochus I, had taken the throne, but his rule was unstable. Others were trying to steal his power, and local governors were ready to take advantage. For Egypt, this was both a risk and a chance. You could try to reclaim land lost in earlier wars, but stepping in could also mean a long, costly battle. This is where Arsinoe's knowledge made the difference. Having lived in the courts of both Lysimachus and Seleucus, she understood royal politics like few others. She knew how generals thought, how they planned, and how they could be beaten or fooled. So when Ptolemy II hesitated, unsure whether to attack or wait, it was Arsinoe who gave the advice that would change Egypt's future. Standing beside him on the palace balcony, watching warships get ready in Alexandria's harbor, she spoke clearly. "Strike now," she said. "Antiochus is weak. His empire is falling apart. If you wait, he'll recover and come back stronger. Attack while he's still bleeding." Her words came from painful experience. She had seen what happened to people who waited too long or hesitated when luck was on their side. Lysimachus had delayed dealing with Agathocles, and it destroyed him. Seleucus acted fast to kill his rival, but later became lazy and allowed enemies to rise against him. The message was clear: success, and Hellenistic politics depended on perfect timing. The war that followed proved her right. Egyptian forces moved quickly through Palestine and southern Syria, taking back lands lost years ago. Cities tired of Seleucid taxes welcomed the Ptolemaic armies as heroes. Arsinoe even joined some of the campaigns, boosting the soldiers' morale and making sure the victories were solidified. But Arsinoe wasn't just good at war. She knew something many others didn't: the power of storytelling. How to shape the image of power and how it would be remembered. With her guidance, the royal court turned into a cultural center, just like Athens in the days of Pericles. Famous poets like Theocritus were hired to write verses, comparing her and Ptolemy to Zeus and Hera. One line said, "Even as Zeus, king of the gods, loves Hera, his sister wife, so does Ptolemy love his bride." It was no accident. If the gods could marry their siblings, then so could the rulers of Egypt. Still, Arsinoe was smart about mixing Greek and Egyptian beliefs. In temples along the Nile, she and Ptolemy were shown as Isis and Osiris, divine siblings whose love kept the universe in balance. The temple carvings used sacred language that made their marriage feel ancient and holy, not foreign or new. Her impact reached every corner of court life. She changed royal traditions to make the rulers seem more like gods. She supported the Great Library in Alexandria, drawing in scholars from all over the known world. She also led the building of grand temples and public spaces that showed off Egypt's strength and pride. One of her most important steps was making sure her stepchildren, especially Ptolemy, the second son from his first marriage, felt included. The boy, who would grow up to be Ptolemy III, was still young when his mother was cast aside. But Arsinoe treated him kindly and gave him respect, knowing that her future safety depended on winning his trust. "You are the future of this dynasty," she once told him in private. "Your father and I are just holding the throne until you're ready. Power doesn't come from your bloodline, it's earned every day, through your choices. The gods made you a prince, but only you can make yourself a king." These were lessons she had learned the hard way. She had seen royal children expect to rule just because of their birth, only to be crushed when they couldn't hold on to power. Young Ptolemy listened, and when it was his time, those lessons would guide him. As time went on, Arsinoe stepped into roles usually meant for men. She sat in on royal meetings and was listened to as seriously as any general or official. She met with foreign envoys, using her knowledge of languages and customs to help Egypt succeed. She even joined sacred rituals that were normally done only by the pharaoh, sharing the spiritual duties that connected Egypt to the gods. Her journey was astonishing. Once a pawn in her father's political games, she had risen to become a ruler in her own right, respected across the Mediterranean. Other kings tried to win her favor, knowing how much influence she had over Ptolemy II. Scholars dedicated books to her, honoring her as a great supporter of the arts. And the people of Egypt saw her as a living goddess, believing that her blessings brought life to the land and prosperity to the nation. But maybe the most important part of Arsinoe's rule was the example she set for future queens of Egypt. Before she married Ptolemy II, royal women were mainly seen as mothers or political tools. They might have had influence behind closed doors, but they didn't usually have official power or titles. Arsinoe changed that. She created a new kind of queenship, one that mixed ancient Egyptian ideas about divine kings with Greek traditions of royal rule. Later queens like Cleopatra II followed her path. But they always knew it was Arsinoe who started it all. There was a deep irony in her story. The same woman who had once been forced into incestuous marriages, used by men for politics, turned those very marriages into a source of power. The chains meant to trap her became the crown she wore with pride. When Arsinoe reached her 50s, she began thinking about the legacy she'd leave behind. She had no children of her own to carry on her bloodline. But she had built something even stronger, a tradition, a powerful image of what a queen could be. The idea of sibling marriage, which began with her union to Ptolemy II, became the signature trait of the Ptolemaic dynasty. It set them apart from other Greek rulers. She even established a cult to honor herself, something no living queen had done before. Temples were built in her name. Festivals were created to celebrate her divine marriage. Priests were appointed to perform rituals in her honor. This wasn't just vanity. It was a clever way to make sure her ideas lived on after her death. She died in 270 BCE at 46 years old. No one knows exactly how, maybe from sickness, poison, or just the toll of a stressful life. But what mattered more than how she died was everything she had done while alive. Her funeral was grand, like that of a pharaoh. The procession moved through Alexandria for days. People from across the Mediterranean came to mourn. Poets read verses about her. Priests gave blessings in many languages. The Egyptian people grieved the loss of their divine queen. But death didn't end her influence. Ptolemy II, now without his partner and co-ruler, made sure her memory lasted. He established an eternal cult for her. She was worshipped as a goddess, Arsinoe Philadelphus, the brother-loving goddess. Her image was placed on temples, coins, and statues for generations to come. Even more importantly, her model of power lived on. Future Ptolemaic rulers followed her lead. They married their siblings to keep the divine image of their rule. This tradition became so important that people couldn't imagine Egyptian royalty without it. Every sibling marriage was a way of honoring her, a reminder that she had discovered how to turn tradition into power. The full tragedy of her story is this: she had once been a victim of arranged incestuous marriages, forced by political games. But she turned that same system into a source of strength for women. What had once been used to control her became the key to her rule. Even after the dynasty fell to the Romans, historians continued to debate what she had done. Some called sibling marriage a sign of moral decay, saying it helped lead to the dynasty's fall. Others saw it as a smart and powerful way to maintain control in a chaotic world. And perhaps the most powerful tribute to Arsinoe came much later. When Julius Caesar came to Alexandria and met Cleopatra VII, he was struck by how confident and commanding she was. "How does she carry herself like a goddess?" he reportedly asked. The answer was simple. She had inherited a legacy started by Arsinoe II, a woman who had turned pain into power and chains into crowns. This was the most remarkable part of Arsinoe's life. She started as a powerless girl, a pawn in others' political games. But through cleverness, strength, and survival, she became something almost unheard of in her time, a woman who ruled not just because of who she married or the sons she bore, but because of her own ability. She paid a heavy price. She gave up her children, her youth, her peace of mind, and, in a way, her humanity. She had to become a goddess because being a woman wasn't enough to survive in her world. But what she gained was historic. She redefined what power could look like for a woman. She proved that even the worst situations could be transformed into something powerful. She showed that victimhood didn't have to last forever. When the sun set on the day of her funeral, casting golden light over the temples where she would be worshipped for centuries, people returned home with the memory of a queen like no other. She had been forced into incest by her own father's political plans, but she turned those plans into power. The children she had hoped would carry her legacy didn't survive. But her true legacy was something bigger. A system, a tradition, a role that future queens would follow. Every sibling marriage, every temple, every coin showing royal siblings, those were all monuments to her. In both life and death, Arsinoe de Philadelphus stayed true to who she had become. A woman who broke the rules others tried to force on her. A woman who turned pain into glory and defeat into something divine. Her life had ended, but her legacy lived on. Long after Rome conquered Egypt, people remembered her. Poets, scholars, and queens carried her story forward as a symbol of how even the most painful chains can become a crown. The girl who had once been sold into incest became the goddess who redefined queenship. And maybe, in the end, that was the victory she wanted most.